Continuing the trend of my recent Flashback Friday videos where I've been looking at the 12-inch Star Wars action figure line from the late 90s, this week I thought I'd turn my attention to one of my all-time favourites in this line. After all, that seems only fair since last week I took a look at what I consider to be one of the worst, which was Chewbacca. So here we have the 12-inch electronic Boba Fett. Now, those of you who saw my 12-inch electronic Darth Vader figure will have an idea of what to expect. These are essentially deluxe versions of characters that had already been produced in the 12-inch line, but of course, these figures also talk. Aside from the obvious packaging differences, this original release, for example, came in a very narrow box. It had that folding front flap, which had a little bit of bio on the inside. There also seems to have been a couple of very minor tweaks to the figure itself, especially in the area of the decals, and we'll look at that a bit closer in a moment. But in terms of the packaging of this deluxe electronic version of the figure, we can see obviously it is a lot broader than the standard narrow packaging we saw with the standard 12-inch line. It is largely just window display, but what we can see around the borders and particularly on the in-tray is pretty consistent with Kenner's Power of the Force line. We have, of course, the star field around the borders, and then inside we have that lightsaber effect, that green lightsaber look there, which is pretty cool. It helps the figure pop out the packaging. I think this is really attractive, and it's very eye-catching. The side panel is still quite narrow, and of course we have the Star Wars logo and we have an image, a production still of the character himself. I think this is taken from The Empire Strikes Back. It looks really nice. You can stack these up on the shelf in line with your other figures in the collection, and they look pretty consistent and quite fun. The reverse of the packaging is a lot more sparse. It is just basically a black template. There's not a lot going on here. We have the Star Wars logo. We have a little bit of Star Wars language at the top of the packaging a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, which is pretty nice. And then we have some indication of the other figures that are in this line. We can see Figurin Dan, we can see the Emperor, and we can see Chewbacca in chains, which we looked at last week. Below this, we do have a nice, larger image of Boba Fett with Darth Vader. But all in all, there's something a little bit bland and disappointing about the reverse of this packaging. It's a shame this space, because it is quite a large space, couldn't have been used for something a bit more exciting. So let's take a look at the figure himself. Now, I've already said that this is one of my favourites in the collection. Hopefully you'll start to get a good reason why, and a lot of that is down to tailoring, which we'll come back to in a moment. But overall, what I really love about this figure is the attention to detail and the amount of paint apps we see on him. If we look at this head sculpt, for example, and we compare it against a still from the film, we can see the dimensions are ever so slightly off. It's a little bit too narrow. The antenna coming out of the top of the helmet there is a little bit too short and squat and thick. Sure, we can pick fault with this, but again, we have to remember this was produced in the 90s. It was aimed primarily at a child audience, and the approach was much simpler than we would expect today. That being said, I do think this is a really nice sculpt. I think it's a very nice figure all in all, because it is roughly in proportion with itself, which I think is really cool. But better than that, I think, is the attention to detail when it comes to the paint apps. Look at all these wonderful decals. We can see all the various dints and scratches on this helmet, and we can see multiple shades of green which really contrast against each other and provide an extra level of texture and detail. I also really like that the visor is painted with a glossy black paint, so it really catches the light perfectly, which is great to see. When I look at this figure, I'm surprised by how much detail, love and care has gone into it. We can see all the various bits and pieces of armour that have been individually added. They're plastic pieces sewn in to the fabric costume underneath. And every single piece of armour has some paint apps on it, whether it be a scratch decal or a little bit of texturing here and there to make the various apps and things that he's got on his gauntlets, for example, look and feel realistic. I really like how they've used different materials to give a very different texture to different parts of this figure. We can see this little cloaky cape thing that he has, which neatly covers, again, a very nicely painted shoulder pad there, which has the logo on it, which looks great. But again, all of this contrasts very nicely. It's a very different material here than what we see in the actual base costume underneath. Whilst on the opposite shoulder, we have these sort of tassels, again, over and under his arm, which look really nice. Now, they do come a bit frayed over time. They are a bit like doll's hair, so they will become frayed and become a bit damaged. Mine has certainly been well played with and become a bit worn, but nevertheless, a really fantastic approach, really interesting concept for the time when it would have been much cheaper to simply mould this in plastic. Then of course we have his jetpack, which is removable. Again, this is nicely sculpted. There's some nice paint apps on this as well, and it's great that this is a removable piece. What's even better though is that it has a spring-loaded missile, which can be activated by pressing this little switch at the bottom of the pack. Again, thinking about detail here, if we look at the gauntlets, we can see the individual firing rocket there on his gauntlet. We can see the paint tabs, we can see the gold, the black, the silver. This is all very nicely sculpted, nicely painted, and then it is a separate plastic piece that is sewn into the costume, which I think is just a wonderful touch. We can also see some detailing on his gloves there as well, and then of course he has these pouches, which are working pockets. Again, these will become frayed and come a bit loose over time, might certainly have, but they is a really nice touch. Again, this would have been easy to just sculpt this in plastic, but they went the extra mile. Similarly, his plastic belt is actually in 2 parts and 2 layers, which is tremendous fun. And we can also see that on certain parts of the armour, there's actual physical indentations as well. Again, on the knee pads, we can see lots of great detailing there and nice paint tabs and different use of colours, which is great. But sewn into the leg is extra bits and pieces as well. I'm not entirely sure what this bit of equipment is, but really cool to see it here. Finally, he's also given unique rubber boots. Rubber boots are pretty consistent in this line, but these are uniquely tailored for Boba Fett. They couldn't be used on any other character. Again, nicely painted, nicely sculpted, and to be fair, there's no hindrance to helping him stand up either. In terms of articulation, there's probably no surprises for anyone who ever owned one of these growing up. It's pretty standard. He has a swivel at the neck, so he can spin his head all the way around. He's got ball joints in the shoulders, so his arms can lift up and out, which is great. And there is a pin swivel at the elbow, meaning his lower arm can rotate from side to side, and of course it will hinge to 90 degrees. There's another pin swivel at the wrist, so again, that lower wrist rotates all the way around and hinges forwards and backwards. There's no ab articulation whatsoever, but there are more ball joints in the legs, so the kick out to the side, the kick forwards, backwards, and there's a single joint at the knee, complemented by a hinge at the ankle. For accessories, he does come with his jetpack, of course, but he also comes with his blaster rifle. Now, sadly, I seem to have misplaced mine. I'm not quite sure where it is, and from memory, it was a single plastic piece, as we can kind of see from this photo here. From memory, it was a fairly accurate, decent attempt at doing a sculpt of his rifle. I don't think it had much in the way of decals or paint apps. It was just a solid piece, but it certainly did the job. Now, of course, the big feature of this particular version of this figure was the fact that he could talk. There's a small button just under his arm, and if you press that, he makes 4 sounds and phrases.
What have you done to survive? Put Captain Solo in the cargo hold. He's no good to me dead.
All in all then, a pretty fantastic figure. For me, this represents one of the best figures in the entire line. Everything about this figure is just really fun. I really love the attention to detail, those decals, the pieces of armour that have been sewn in to really create that texture of being armour. I love all the little bits and pieces, the pouches, the tassels, the cape. I love the fact that he has a working firing missile that can be removed off his backpack, which is fantastic. And I just think all in all, this figure looks the part. It looks really, really fun. It was immense fun to play with as a kid, and it seems to offer so much. And the added sound effects are just the icing on the cake, in my opinion. The only criticism I can really level at this figure is that, yeah, sure, the proportions might be off a little bit, but hey, considering the day and age this was released in and the audience it was aimed at, this is pretty top-notch stuff. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.